So, everyone, thank you very much for coming back. We will now have session 2, a future of the alliance, sunrise or sunset. The facilitator is Ms. Kristi Govella, a senior advisor and Japan chair CSIS. Over to you, Kristi.
お願いいたします。
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to session 2. It's my honor to be moderating this distinguished panel, and thanks to the organizers for putting together this wonderful event. Before we begin, we would like to pay tribute to 2 longtime participants in this symposium who passed away earlier this year, Richard Armitage and Joseph Nye, Jr. Their fireside chats at this Nikkei CSIS Symposium really helped to shape the discourse on U.S.-Japan relations and international relations in Asia for the last 2 decades. So we'd like you to please turn your attention to the screen for a short video that CSIS has produced to honor their legacy.
In spring 2025, we lost 2 key architects of the U.S.-Japan alliance, Richard Armitage and Joseph Nye, Jr. For decades, these policy leaders worked tirelessly to ensure bipartisan support in the United States for what they considered America's essential Asian relationship. Between 2000 and 2024, they co-authored 6 landmark monographs that mapped the strategic trajectory for the U.S.-Japan alliance in the 21st century. Taken together, these Armitage-Nye reports are the perfect showcase of their dedication to this vital partnership. Armitage and Nye issued their first report in 2000, arguing that a more mature partnership was required to reverse a post-Cold War drift in the alliance. It recommended steps to strengthen cooperation in the areas of politics, security, intelligence, and economics, and became a blueprint for the George W. Bush administration's Japan strategy and Asia policy. Their second report, issued in 2007, called for a coordinated alliance approach to manage the rise of China. Looking ahead to 2020, they observed that to get Asia right, the United States had to get Japan right. They also stressed the importance of bilateral security cooperation and coordination with regional partners such as Australia, Korea, and India. The third Armitage and Nye report arrived in 2012 amidst a period of Japanese political instability that had generated 6 prime ministers in 6 years and concerns in Washington about its strategic value. That report reaffirmed the importance of the U.S.-Japan alliance as an anchor for stability in Asia and asked provocatively, does Japan desire to continue to be a Tier 1 nation, or is she content to drift into Tier 2 status? 6 months later, Japan issued a direct response.
Last year, Richard Armitage, Joseph Nye, Martin Green, and others published a paper about Japan. They asked if Japan would end up becoming a Tier 2 nation. Secretary Armitage, here is my answer to you. Japan is not and will never be a Tier 2 country.
Subsequent reports in 2018, 2020, and 2024 sought to encourage Japan's increased investments in defense capabilities and build bilateral alignment on Indo-Pacific strategy. Over that period, Armitage and Nye also called for a more integrated alliance to manage a range of complex global challenges that included geopolitical competition, the COVID pandemic, economic turmoil, and the technological revolution. Armitage and Nye were always candid, sincere, and forward-looking. Their vigorous scholarship lived up to the advice they offered policymakers in 2018. Standing still is a recipe for falling behind. They inspired a generation of experts and leave a legacy of strategic insight and stewardship from which current and future architects of the U.S.-Japan relationship will benefit for years to come.
Thank you for your attention. So now we'll turn to a panel discussion, which has been provocatively titled Future of the Alliance, Sunrise or Sunset. So, as we've already talked about, our symposium today is taking place at a time of great change in both the US and Japan, with very new or relatively new administrations in both countries. Just days ago, Japan elected its first female prime minister, who finds herself at the head of a new political coalition of the Liberal Democratic Party and Isshin no Kai, marking a new phase for Japan at a time when politics are very fluid domestically. And in the US, of course, the second Trump administration began in January, and we've seen a variety of changes in domestic and foreign policy, most prominently on the trade side, but also ones that impact security quite strongly. So next week, we'll also see President Trump come to Japan and engage with Prime Minister Takaichi for the first time, setting the tone for the weeks and the months to come. So with all of these developments, it's an important time to take a moment to step back and assess where the US-Japan alliance is today and where it is going in the future. We're very fortunate to have a fantastic panel of speakers here today who are very well positioned to give us their expert insights on these questions. And they've each had very distinguished careers, and we don't have time to highlight all of their accomplishments. So I'll just introduce them very briefly. Starting on my left, we have Dr. Jimbo Ken, who is Professor of International Relations at Keio University and Managing Director of Programs at the International House of Japan. Next to him, we have Dr. Campbell, the chairman and co-founder of the Asia Group. Prior to rejoining the Asia Group, he most recently served as the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State under the Biden administration. Next to him, we have Mr. Randall Schriver, chairman of the board at the Institute of the Indo-Pacific Security and a partner at Pacific Solutions, LLC. He previously served as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security during the first Trump administration. And last but not least, we have Admiral Kawano Katsutoshi, former Chief of Staff of the Joint Staff of the Japan Self-Defense Forces. So I'd actually like to start with Mr. Schriver. So could you start by reminding us how the US-Japan defense cooperation relationship evolved during the first Trump administration? What do you see as the key similarities or differences in this second Trump administration so far?
Great, well, thank you. We'll take a stroll down memory lane before we talk about the sunrise or sunset. I think if you isolate the defense relationship in Trump 1.0, which is a bit artificial, of course, but in doing so, I think it's very defensible to say it was net positive, and toto it was a positive period. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. I think number one, the inheritance was quite good. The work that the Obama administration did on the pivot or rebalance, a lot of that entailed close consultations with Japan and reorienting the alliance for the emerging challenges and threats. And so I think there was a great deal of momentum. In fact, when I was Assistant Secretary, I always said on the defense side, policy was more evolutionary than revolutionary, very much built on the good work of predecessor administrations. But I think also, really for the first time since the end of the Cold War, there was a great deal of strategic alignment between the United States and Japan, and codified in our strategic documents. When we produced a national defense strategy that talked about the Indo-Pacific as the primary theater, that talked about China as the number one challenge and the pacing threat, and we talked about the preservation of the free and open order as an organizing principle, I think we were in complete alignment with Japan. In fact, the free and open Indo-Pacific was really cultivated here first, and we sort of appropriated that, but in a way that brought both countries along, I think, in very important ways. So I think our starting point on the defense relationship was a tremendous strategic alignment, and that helped a great deal. We also had some very important, I guess you could say, projects. So when we began the campaign of maximum pressure directed at North Korea, it was Japan that stepped up and said, not only will we participate in sanctions enforcement activities, we will be the host here in Japan for an international coalition, including the air component, the international coalition air component that really was the enforcing mechanism for the maximum pressure campaign. And that kind of cooperation on a real world challenge does a lot to strengthen a relationship and strengthen military to military ties. But we were also forward looking. I think a lot of the things that were announced publicly or came to fruition in subsequent administrations, both the Biden administration and even now in the Trump administration. A lot of that was formulated in Trump 1, the idea of introducing counter-strike and the doctrinal changes that might be associated with that and the implications for roles and missions. Discussions about Taiwan. Kurt and I go back a ways. I worked for Kurt in the 1990s, and tremendous work done on the U.S.-Japan alliance in the Clinton administration, but you'll notice a gaping hole there where it comes to the issue of Taiwan. We could talk about areas surrounding Japan, we could talk about all kinds of things, but Taiwan was basically a taboo subject. In the first Trump administration, it was the Abe administration that came to us and said, Taiwan security is Japan's security, and we need to take this much more seriously in terms of our bilateral preparations. And it was really then that the idea of a bilateral plan between our militaries was launched. That was perhaps long overdue, but in many ways forward-looking, particularly when you consider where we are now in the Taiwan Strait. Now, it was certainly not without difficulties and perturbations. We mentioned earlier the U.S.-ROK-Japan trilateral relationship. It was very difficult at the political level, to be sure, under Moon Jae-in and Prime Minister Abe. But at the Defense Department, we always said it's a bit like the music of Wagner. It's better than it sounds, because our trilateral cooperation never hesitated, never stopped. Even in very difficult periods, we had an incident where a ship illuminated an aircraft, and there was discussion of pulling out of Jisome. But we met at a trilateral level at every Shangri-La meeting. Our defense ministers always met in a trilateral setting. I remember the day General Milley swore in as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He took the oath of office in his residence, and he went immediately to a breakfast with his Japanese and South Korean counterparts. So it was better in the Defense Department and our Defense Ministry relationships than it was at the political level, and that's because exactly what Victor Cha mentioned. We were compelled to cooperate, driven together by the emerging threats from particularly North Korea at the time, but increasingly China. There were other issues. I said we're talking in an artificial way about defense as a standalone. Of course, we had trade policies and discussion of tariffs. I think it was a bit of a shock to the alliance that we would consider a 232 investigation of potential tariffs on national security grounds. That was either an innovation if you're in one camp, or quite a blow to the alliance in another, that we would accuse them of activities that were harmful to our national security. And there were other perturbations as well, but again, I think those were managed, and we had great people, of course, Secretary Mattis, Harry Harris at Indo-Pacific, and then Admiral Davis, great counterparts on the Japanese side, including Defense Minister Onodera, and Admiral Kawano's influence was quite significant, both on active duty and as a former. So I think we handed off to the Biden administration an alliance that was in very good shape, particularly on the defense side. And the question now is your second part of the question, what about 2.0? And I think many of the same issues loom. One thing I didn't mention about the first term, because it was a bit of a loitering munition over our head, which is host nation support, but we had South Korea go first, and Japan could sort of run out the clock, so we never had to sort of deal with that host nation support issue. Burden sharing will certainly be an issue in the discussions going forward. And I think, as these challenges get more severe, more intense, the questions of reliability, abandonment, or cohesion and reliability, all these things come into question, rightfully. That when you need it most is when you want to know the answers to those questions. And we're being challenged in ways that I think are unprecedented, not only from China, but this axis that others have mentioned, China, North Korea, Russia, throw Iran in there. So I think some of the same perturbations I mentioned in the first term are going to play even larger, and questions about the durability of the alliance in the face of these challenges, that's something that will have to be certainly worked through.
Thank you. So, of course, if we think about what's happened since the first Trump administration, there have been many changes in Japan on the security and defense front. So I'd like to turn to Mr. Kawano and ask, one of the many changes that's happened recently that's quite significant is this development of the new Self-Defense Forces Joint Operations Command. So how do you assess this new command, and what do you think are the challenges and opportunities for closer cooperation between the U.S. and Japan moving forward?
I speak Japanese. Yes, okay.
First of all, as Minister Nakatani has kindly referred to me, so let me return his favor. Under Nakatani-gen 1.0, there was 9/11, and after that, what to do with self-defense force operations in the Indian Ocean. I was actually the man responsible for that. And then Nakatani, again, 2.0, I was the chief of staff of the Joint Staff. So whenever major events and incidents were happening, I have served Mr. Nakatani. And unfortunately, I was not able to serve him under Nakatani 3.0, but I have worked closely with him. Now about JJOC, the Joint Operational Command. I hope that our U.S. participants will be able to understand. Let me briefly explain. In 1954, the self-defense force has been established, but under Japanese Constitution, Article 9, the SDF was established under this constitution. So for many, many decades, the Article 9 has always been the bind for the self-defense force, because we were always questioned whether we were constitutional or not. So if there is no desperate need or demand for that, the politicians were hesitant to change the status of self-defense force. That has continued for many decades because the Japanese public would raise havoc if any change was to be brought. So even though defense capabilities had been strengthened gradually, but the three services of the self-defense force, they had to be engaged in just training. But then, in 1991, the Gulf War occurred. For the multinational forces, what can Japan do to contribute? Was the question raised. There was a demand coming from President Bush of the United States, the Bush the father. And that is because ever since the self-defense force has been established, this was the first time that we were to face this crisis. And we have put forward $13 billion of funding, but we were not given any favorable evaluation. So it was 1991 in April, the minesweepers of the self-defense force had been sent to the Gulf. So I believe that was a major turning point, that self-defense force have turned from training to operations. And also for Indian Ocean operation under the 9/11 crisis, the self-defense force was now in an operation mode. So in my sense, right now, the Japanese people have great trust and confidence of the self-defense force. We are grateful for that. It is not that the self-defense force was able to gain trust and confidence of the people, but rather self-defense force have first taken the action, and that has led to trust and confidence of the Japanese people. When self-defense force have come into operational mode, you cannot really separate the three services in their domain. You need to have joint operation, integration. So in 2006, Chief of Staff of Joint Staff was newly established. It was just in 2006, just 20 years ago, even though self-defense force itself was in presence from 1954. And then the JJOC and Joint Commander, people were aware that we needed such organization, but we were not able to jump forward. So as an interim, we just had the Chief of Staff of the Joint Staff for the time being. So under my own command, there was no Joint Commander of the JJOC. So my counterpart was in Washington, D.C., the Joint Chief of Staff. And at the same time, because we didn't have the Joint Commander, the Indo-Pacific Commander was also my counterpart as well. So I had to have two different roles for many decades. But then we have newly established JJOC and also the commander for JJOC. So the Chief of Staff of Joint Staff, the only counterpart will be the Joint Chief of Staff of the United States, and the Indo-Pacific Commander's counterpart is now the JJOC commander. So now we have sorted out the relationship, and interoperability has been enhanced. And as Minister Nakatani has said, the alertness has also been enhanced significantly. Now, in our relationship with the United States, what may happen going forward? There are some things which are not clear. Of course, there is the U.S. Forces in Japan commander in Yokota base. He is not the commander for the operations, but he is commander for the administration. As I said, when U.S. Forces in Japan encounters any problem in Japan, the commander will take action. But now with the JJOC newly established in this country, the U.S. Forces in Japan command, perhaps the nature needs to be changed or not. This is what I hear, that the commander of the U.S. Forces in Japan will also become commander for the operations as well. Then the commander for the U.S. Forces in Japan in Yokota and the 7th Fleet commander. And what about the Marines in Okinawa, the commander there? What are the relationship amongst the three? If they are to come under integrated command and control, then as compared to the Indo-Pacific commander, there will be another joint, newly established, so to speak, for smooth joint operation. Whether it will be positive change or not, would it complicate things? I'm sure there will be close consultation between the United States and Japan going forward, but this is the unclear point still remaining.
Thank you for that context. It's important to note how far we've come, but still there are questions that remain to be decided, and those discussions will likely be going on very quickly and very soon in this new environment. So turning towards some of the other questions that are in the minds of many people, I'd like to turn to Professor Jimbo and ask, how confident do you think Japan is in U.S. extended deterrent commitments right now? So if we look at South Korea, for example, there have been increasing debates about whether South Korea needs its own nuclear weapons. The actions of the second Trump administration are being viewed in various ways in these countries, in these allies. So do you think that attitudes in Japan are changing towards things such as nuclear sharing, or how do you see these discussions of deterrence developing in the future?
Well, thank you, Kristi. And since I see more Japanese audiences here, allow me also to speak in Japanese.
Extended deterrence-related challenges in the past decade, at least there have been three phases in the past decade or so in the context of extended deterrence. The guideline was put together in 2015, the Japan-U.S. Defense Cooperation Guideline. And back then, the biggest challenge was Senkaku remote island defense. Gray zone situation becoming more increasingly serious. How to respond to that kind of a situation was the key question. Japan and the United States in all domains, seamless response was the answer by the Japan-U.S. What do we mean by seamless? First, gray zone situation, that is one step before contingency, and from pre-contingency to contingency, there has to be a seamless response. Coast Guard, maritime self-defense forces and U.S. Marine, they have to operate seamlessly, even if it's a gray zone situation. Ultimately, Japan-U.S. Security Treaty Article 5 situation can be triggered so that the foe will hesitate to make a further step. And this was during Campbell's period. Since 2010, Japan and the United States declared that Article 5 of Japan-U.S. Security Arrangement, Article 5 will apply to Senkaku. So both Japan and the United States at the same time recognize that the Senkaku situation is at the core of deterrence, and that was the basis before the seamless response. That was the first stage. Fortunately, a serious escalation has not taken place thanks to that. So in that regard, I think we did a good job.
で、第2番目のフェーズは
The second phase started in the latter half of 2010s. Taiwan contingency had to be taken into account. We should be prepared for high-end escalation. How to apply extended deterrence there became a question. Chinese military capability could contain operational access of the U.S. forces in West Pacific. So A2AT capability, Chinese enhanced capability, how to respond to that, that was a key question. And roughly speaking, there were 3 elements that we wanted to apply. First, Japan-U.S. working together to ensure operational access. So we worked hard on that. Secondly, if China were to make a counterstrike, Japan and the United States together could ensure war sustainability. We now have a new minister, but more than 50,000 joint exercises is now being performed as we speak by JSF self-defense forces with the U.S. forces and Australian forces. And the scenario there is to respond to war sustainability. 39 airports and seaports are used for this exercise, and civilian airports are also covered in order to ensure sustainability of our operations. So the Japan-U.S. operations are now trying to adjust to the new scenarios. And the third is nuclear deterrence. To achieve what we want to achieve, how did Japan apply extended deterrence, as Randy Schriver and Kawano-san mentioned? SDF's capability has to be enhanced so that Japan and the United States can perform the joint operations at the high end and expand that domain. And secondly, decision-making process, operation process, we can perform same tasks so that, and we need to establish a command structure. That is why we now have JJOC and U.S. Forces Japan Joint Force Command 24/7 joint operations with the U.S. Forces Japan. And the third card is a guideline for extended deterrence. 2024 December, Ministry of Defense negotiated with U.S. forces. But when employing nuclear weapons, the standardized operational procedure shared between Japan and the United States, the decision-making on the use of nuclear weapons was put on the table of U.S.-Japan alliance discussion. And the third phase is Trump administration. There are a lot of uncertainties. Uncertainties are very high. Trump administration, even under Trump administration, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, State Department, and military U.S. relationships remain strong. However, the politics as a phenomenon is far from alliance of hope, alliance of values. It's like a subscription alliance. If you want security assurance, you have to pay more. I'm very concerned that there has been a shift to this direction, and Secretary Hex's his role is to expand the decision space for Trump, and Japan has to support Secretary Hexes to expand, widen the decision space for President Trump. We will try to do that, but even if we were to expand the decision space for President Trump, it doesn't necessarily mean that the U.S. Defense commitment will be stronger. So this is a very difficult situation that U.S. allies are facing at the moment.
A deep contextual environment explanation of deterrence. That was very useful. Yes, Mr. Kawano, please.
First of all, what has been discussed about the nuclear sharing? Let me add my remarks. Under the nuclear, the umbrella of the United States, our trust and confidence over that umbrella has not changed, but what has changed is the environment surrounding us. So we are totally dependent upon the nuclear umbrella of the United States. But the NPT is completely functional. That is a prerequisite for this. But with the Ukrainian war, Russia, who is a nuclear weapon state, has been threatening Ukraine, which is not a nuclear weapon state, that the nuclear weapons may be used. What has not been envisaged by the NPT regime at all is happening. And what should Japan do? Should Japan be complacent enough to do nothing? This is what is being argued right now. Nothing to do with the United States, but as our own problem within our own scope of responsibility, perhaps we need to think about the nuclear issue. That there are arguments who contends that Japan should also possess a nuclear weapon. I am not really prescribing to this view, but of the three non-principles, not to develop or not to possess, that's fine, but not to allow to bring in the nuclear weapon, this is something problematic, that if we are to depend upon the nuclear umbrella of the United States, whether to use the nuclear weapon or not, that is also to do with the national interest of Japan. We need to have a system whereby Japan will be able to be engaged in a system of consultation with the United States, be it North Korea or be it China. When it comes to nuclear, Japan seems to be turning our deaf ears. But if we can be involved in the discussion and consultation with the United States, that would mean the deterrence capability of Japan will be heightened and improved. So perhaps Japan needs to be engaged in such discussion.
For that intervention. We'll have time for questions from the audience too, so perhaps we can come back to these topics a little bit more. Before we move to a more free discussion, though, I would like to ask Dr. Campbell for his thoughts on not only the U.S.-Japan alliance, but also the broader network of allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific and perhaps beyond. So during the Biden administration, you worked very hard to build these connections, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. What kind of a leadership role do you think that Japan can play now in taking up and perhaps sustaining or even strengthening minilaterals such as the U.S.-Japan ROK trilateral, which we heard about in the previous panel, or the Quad or the Squad? So what role can Japan play, and do you see this as a priority for the second Trump administration?
First of all, Kristi, thank you very much. It's an honor to be with my colleagues on the panel today. Kristi, I'd like to thank you and Dr. Hamre and Victor for starting us off with such a powerful tribute to Rich Armitage and Joe Nye. Randy and I worked closely with both of them. They were probably the two most important men in my life for decades, and it's wonderful to remember them. And I always think fondly of this time every year where their work was on full display. I also just want to say a word of thanks to our good friend, Jen Nakatani, who served with such distinction for so many years. And I think what he has described and what we've heard over the course of the last few minutes is that the momentum in the U.S.-Japan relationship is just unmistakable. And the process is underway for reforming our command structures, our innovations, and joint capabilities in co-production. I have high confidence, Kristi, that we were going to proceed in an important way. We are convening here. It would be hard to describe how important this moment is. And what's most important, frankly, is that on the way to what will likely be a meeting between President Trump and Xi Jinping, he will have an opportunity for an extended meeting with the new Japanese Prime Minister Takeuchi-san, who we all know. She is often referred to or aspires to be, in some respects, the Margaret Thatcher of the East. And that indeed is a powerful metaphor for us to think about for her service that lies ahead. We have to remember one of the most important elements of what Margaret Thatcher did during her time. She was not just an able ally and supporter of the United States, she spoke truth to power. She was extremely decisive with President Reagan about a variety of issues, deployments in Europe and standing with Britain in the Falklands. She was unmistakable in her views and her dynamic approach to the strength of the U.S.-British alliance. We meet next week, our two countries, the United States and Japan, at a similar moment in which it will be absolutely decisive to figure out exactly where President Trump intends to take the United States in the Indo-Pacific. And I would say here, Kristi, we see some signs that are encouraging and some signs that are uncertain. What Randy described and what I believe fundamentally the greatest progress that we've seen over the course of the last few decades is a profoundly bipartisan approach to what's essential to maintain peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. And at the core of that is stronger, more intensive fundamental relations with allies and partners. And that's at the core of the U.S.-Japan relationship, South Korea, Australia, other countries in Southeast Asia, and India. And the work that was done over decades in terms of engagements, bilateral, multilateral, minilateral, I think have been essential to basically placing this at the center of our strategy. Now, what's important to understand is that there, in fact, have been no clear statements of strategy out of the Trump administration when it comes to Asia. We don't actually talk about it very much, but we're left with substantial uncertainties. And it is our hope that Takeuchi-san, much in the way that President Abe, Prime Minister Abe, played such a critical role in President Trump's first term, will make the powerful case of the importance of the U.S.-Japan alliance and its centrality in the maintenance of peace and stability and basically everything that we've done. We have a few things that I think encourage us that we can point to. The meeting that took place earlier this week between Australian Prime Minister Albanese and President Trump, I think, was quite reassuring. We saw a clear commitment to go ahead with AUKUS. I think it is undeniable that there were elements in the Pentagon that were frankly determined to kill it or to move in a different direction. President Trump made very clear that he was dispatching those concerns, moving ahead an ambitious plan on critical minerals and rare earths, overdue, important. I think that's going to go forward. I think we can be reassured by those movements, and my hope is that when Prime Minister Takeuchi and President Trump meet, that they will advance, put some of our trade issues behind us, and advance a number of common areas of mutual work. I think the real issue, though, guys, is the ambiguity that is associated with President Trump and a couple of key relations. He has an unusual attraction to Russia, China, and North Korea that is difficult to explain. It's clear he wants a positive meeting with President Xi. He's looking to try to ease some tensions. I think some of that is commendable, but at the same time, I also believe the steps that Russia, China, and North Korea have taken are just unmistakable. They are unmistakably hostile to the international system, to the United States, to Japan, and we have to just acknowledge that and be clear about it. What's interesting, I would have expected both Russia and China to be more effective at maneuvering to try to appeal to President Trump, but at every stage they have taken steps to reaffirm in many respects, their hostility to the United States. The one thing that happened, Kristi, just a couple of weeks ago that I found a little chilling is when it looked finally like President Trump had reaffirmed support for Ukraine, that he was going to come down to support Ukraine against the brutal invasion from Russia. Talked about rearming and gaining territory. It was, and there was a lot of consternation in Russia. It was President Medvedev who the former president of Russia said, look, let's be calm here in Russia. These are side issues. We have to remember President Trump always comes home. That frankly worries me, concerns me, and so the key for Prime Minister Takeuchi is to affirm the strongest bipartisan consensus that we've seen over the last 30 years, and that is the common approach that we've had in security, in issues associated with peace and prosperity among allies and partners. At the core of that is the U.S.-Japan relationship. So I am actually counting on Japan as much as anything else to make this extraordinarily important case directly to the president around the need to continue these efforts to place this relationship at the core of security in Asia. The core of relations in Asia is not the relationship between the United States and China. It's important, it's critical, but I think we have to realize that our ultimate security will be delivered through these key partnerships in the Indo-Pacific. I'm a little worried, Kristi, I'll just conclude. I'd love to see the Quad reconvened at the leader level. I'm hopeful about AUKUS. I'd like to see the trilateral continue. We have not seen as much clarity, frankly, on the Trump administration along these lines. I would contend that the most important relationship for the United States, ironically, in the 21st century is the relationship between the United States and India. The country that was most confident that they would manage the Trump second term effectively was the Indian government. We have seen over the course of the last 8 months the dramatic, unprecedented decline in relations between Delhi and Washington in ways that are almost inconceivable. I hope we'll be able to get that back on track. India is the key to the Quad. I also believe that a strong U.S.-India relationship is one of the most important signals that we can send to China. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get some of these things back on track. This is the critical week, next week, as President Trump goes to East Asia, to the East Asia Summit in Malaysia, to the critical bilateral relations with our most important partner in Japan, to meet South Korea, and in all likelihood to meet Xi Jinping, what will be a very consequential set of engagements. My hope is the President will stand strong with the full backing of the Prime Minister. Thanks, Kristi.
Thank you. It's absolutely critical to think about the U.S. and Japan in this larger regional and global context, and to think about how other countries like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, et cetera, are cooperating in ways that really change the strategic environment and make us go beyond bilateral thinking. So I think the panel, although they have each expressed uncertainties in each way, is leaning a little more towards sunrise and sunset at the moment. There's more optimism and emphasis on these areas of continuity and consensus. But I want to push a little bit on areas that we know will be discussions in coming months, particularly burden sharing, which is a very predictable issue that will come up. I'd like to turn to Mr. Schriver first. So you've advocated for thinking about allied burden sharing in ways that are not just about strict defense spending or host nation support. So when you think about Japan's contributions to burden sharing in this more comprehensive sense, what do you think that looks like?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. Let me just first say on the broader issue of, what is creating the anxiety and the uncertainty. President Trump, there's a couple of very significant things that contribute to this. One is the smashing of norms, as Kellyanne Shaw mentioned, that is no regard for norms and happy to smash away. And the other is this reputation of being highly transactional. I think most presidents are transactional, but highly transactional and willing to go with his gut despite what other objective analysis might suggest his course should be. But if we don't take counsel of our fears and we say, what do we have? We have not only this meeting with Prime Minister Albanese, we have a meeting with Prime Minister Ishiba that produced an incredible joint statement. When I saw that statement, I said, surely this is a Japanese draft that we haven't marked up yet. I mean, it was everything that our alliance could have hoped for, and that becomes the operational guiding document. Same with meeting with the South Koreans, with new President Lee. We have a Shangri-La speech that was very strong on traditional alliances and countering China. We have an interim national defense strategy, very strong on deterring China and working with partners and allies. So yes, there's that uncertainty that hangs out there when he sees General Secretary Xi. Will it be the President Trump that shows up and goes with his gut? You know, I accompanied him as a representative to our 2 summit meetings with Kim Jong-un, and in Hanoi, I saw him walk away from what he thought was a bad deal. That's another aspect of him. He does not want to take a bad deal. He's not interested in looking weak, looking like he made too many concessions, was overly solicitous to his counterpart. So I choose to be optimistic, and I choose to look at the sunrise side of things. On the question of burden sharing, you know, I think we've already seen some adjustments from President Trump himself. I don't know about his team, and we've seen some, you know, remarkable statements coming out of the Department of Defense about what partners and allies should be spending on defense. But look at the meeting that President Trump had with new South Korean President Lee. Now, this was a relationship at the end of Trump 1. He let the host nation agreement expire, the special measures agreement expire, because he, quote unquote, South Korea wasn't willing to pay enough. But on this occasion, he talked more about shipbuilding, and he talked more about cooperative aspects of the alliance that would be mutually beneficial. And so my view, and you know, listen to me at your own risk, it's not necessarily representative of the Trump administration, is that there is more of an inclination to broaden that discussion about burden sharing. What can Japan do for itself? What can Japan do that contributes to the United States? Shipbuilding would equally apply to Japan, as well as maintenance and repair. What can Japan contribute in terms of the shared regional challenges we have, South China Sea, ongoing issues in the Korean Peninsula, et cetera. So I think I've never thought that percentage spend of GDP is a very good metric. It's not what you spend, it's what you buy. And by the way, your percentage spend of GDP can go up if your economy goes down. That doesn't seem like a very good measure to me. But I do see signs that the president himself, I don't know about his team, but the president himself is already inclined to broaden this discussion about what burden sharing means, and is very interested in what our allies can do in terms of contributing to the U.S. He knows that we need help on shipbuilding. He knows we need help on posture. And so I'm a little bit more optimistic on that front as well.
Thank you. Would any of the other panelists like to weigh in on the question of burden sharing? Yes, please, Dr. Campbell.
Yeah. I align myself fully with what Randy described. I think, need to underscore, and I think Randy would as well, the remarkable generosity, frankly, that Japan has provided for decades. If you've ever had an opportunity to visit American military facilities in Japan, in Okinawa and other parts of the country, they are remarkable. They are state-of-the-art, frankly, much better than the Japanese self-defense forces in many respects. And so I think we also have to recognize what remarkable things Japan has done for the United States. It's in our best interests, clearly, and theirs, but the idea that they have not been generous, forthcoming is inaccurate. They have been for decades. You know, hundreds of thousands of dollars per every soldier, sailor, and Marine that serves or comes to Japan. But I also agree with Randy about the other areas that are going to be important. The challenge is, I think Randy is right to point to some of the things that are very positive and that we have to be clear-eyed and hopeful about. But there are undeniable areas of anxiety, which he's chosen not to focus as much on. The national security strategy that is about to come out is actually focused much more on Latin and South America. That's a huge surprise given the challenges in the Indo-Pacific. The hope is we can square that circle and still remain firmly engaged. clear issue, Kristi, is that if you would ask the larger framing of where the United States is in many of these areas, it would really be ambiguity under the Trump administration. And I think that ambiguity can be useful in certain circumstances, but with allies and partners, it creates anxiety and confusion. And so clear statements of strategy and purpose, I think, are going to be important going forward. Every administration has pros and cons. I think one of the important things about the Bush administration, about Clinton, what took place in Obama and Biden, clear documents that lay out, cleared throughout our interagency, what our strategic purposes were and what our plans of action. I'd like to see more of that in the period ahead. Thank you.
Yes.
私はですね、
For myself, if things remain unchanged, I believe there is a risk of our alliance facing sunset. But if there is a policy shift, if there were to be a policy shift, we could achieve sunrise. Because President Trump said that U.S.-Japan alliance is unfair. He said that in his first term as well. Some people in Japan just take light of it. Trump is just special, extraordinary. Mr. Armitage, Mr. Nye were on the complete opposite side of Trump. And 6 Armitage, 9 reports, with the most famous is the 2001 report. And they say a Japan-U.S. alliance should strive to be U.S.-UK alliance, and Japan should proceed towards a collective self-defense. They advocated that back in 2000. When Japan is attacked, U.S. will come for help. If U.S. is attacked, Japan will not come for the rescue. It is clear that there is unfairness there. So far, as Mr. Hamner said, Japan-U.S. relations used to be the big brother and the younger brother. It did not surface during those days, but equal partnerships will be asked of Japan in the new era. And in the face of Chinese challenge, a threat, the United States needs Japan. So Japan and the United States are no longer big brother, small brother. But if the United States were to look at Japan as equal partner, this sense of unfairness is very dangerous. And both China and North Korea are aware of this crack. So I believe there is a need for Japan to work to fill the crack, the sense of unfairness. What is at the root of a sense of unfairness? The scope of application of Japan-U.S. security arrangement is only applicable to those areas that are under the administration of Japan. U.S. Philippine Pacific, Japan-U.S. Pacific, America, Australia, New Zealand. The coverage will be the Pacific region. It is only Japan that the U.S. defense will apply to areas which is under the Japanese administration. So the security legislation, though showed a full-scale, limited exercise of collective right to self-defense, it's enshrined in the documents. Japan had struggled, so we need to utilize, make the best use of collective right to collective self-defense. No single word has been changed in the U.S.-Japan security arrangement since 1960. So it might be problematic to expand immediately the coverage to the Pacific, but why not cover the West Pacific, which includes Guam, obviously. By expanding the coverage of the U.S.-Japan security arrangement, the sense of unfairness could be reduced to a significant extent. And if that can be done, the Japan-U.S. alliance will face a sunrise. Will experience a sunrise. I know there are pros and cons, and I would very much like to hear your views on that.
Kawano and Professor Jimbo, would you like to weigh in?
先ほど議論のあった
What has been discussed earlier, that's to say, the National Defense Strategy of the United States will soon be published, is what we expect. Now, the Indo-Pacific to be placed on a top priority as a theater to think about the defense planning, what we have hoped to see. But the homeland defense and the Western Hemisphere security will be given higher priorities, is what I hear in the rumors. So how would that impact Japan-US alliance will become a major issue between our two countries in the coming months. The familiar United States for Japan now have changed. That is to say, the superpower, a maritime superpower, was what we were familiar with. But now the United States is changing. Stability in the whole of the world will bring stability for the United States. But now United States is trying to look at Panama, Mexico, Greenland, and Gaza, and the mineral, the critical mineral, the agreement with Australia. It's perhaps acting like more of a continental state rather than maritime power. But going forward, the America First policy of the United States and Japan-US alliance to be strengthened, the two will be hand in hand. This is what Japan should suggest to the United States. In order to strengthen defense capability of the United States, there was earlier a talk about shipbuilding. The allies for the United States, the scale of co-production of Korea and Japan with the United States, and that would be conducive to strengthening the defense capability of the United States and the R&D as well as co-production with the allies. And therefore, the alliance as well as the America First policy will be intertwined with each other. As uncertainty is rising for the United States, Japan should be proactive in the leading way forward for Japan-US alliance. And that, I believe, is quite important.
Well, the picture is getting a little bit more complicated now in this latest round of responses. But at this point, I'd like to open up to questions from our in-person audience. We have time for perhaps 2 or 3 questions. Would anybody like to ask our distinguished panelists about anything that has been raised so far or new topics?
Thank you very much. My name is Régis Arnaud. I work for Le Figaro. I had a question specific for Mr. Kawano. There is a famous rivalry between the Navy and the Army in Japan. It's not just an idea of the Constitution. And we thought, and we think, and we assume, and we want this rivalry to be finally resolved and all work together under a joint chief of staff, right? But from what you explained, I'm not sure who is actually running the Japanese Army. I'm not sure of the line of command after what you explained. So maybe it should be more clarified, and then we would have a better alliance and a more logical alliance with your US partner. So that's what I'm a bit confused. I wanted to ask you to clarify that very, very important point, because in terms of crisis, we want to know who is ruling, right? Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you for the question. Well, every nation has rivalries between different branches of the forces. In securing budget, in particular, different military branches will vie with each other to secure sufficient budget. I would say self-defense forces, the 3 branches of SDFs, have been working closely. I think there has been a lot of success. The biggest reason behind this is that the leadership of the SDF, many of the leaders are graduates of National Defense Academy. In France, you have different schools, Navy school, Air Force school, different streams of education. But in Japan, we eat the same rice from the same rice cooker. Using a Japanese expression. So at the Japanese National Defense Academy, there is a lot of camaraderie. Nakatani-san came from ground SDF. I'm from the Maritime Self-Defense Force. There's no barrier between different branches of SDF. So in that regard, in comparison to other countries, I believe there is a strong collaboration amongst the different branches. And we have civilian control. So when there is, in the face of a crisis, we have the JJOC control, and we have the Chief of Staff, Joint Staff, under the instruction of the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense. And we in the military do follow the instructions and orders of the civilian leaders.
From the audience. Yes. In the front, please. And
thank you, Dimitri from Financial Times. I'm curious, Kurt, what do you see are the biggest risks to the US-Japan alliance right now? What are the things that you put in place and that Randy and others did in the previous administration that may be in jeopardy at the moment?
Dimitri, thank you for the question. I think you've seen some signs of it in our discussions already. I think I liked what the previous panel discussed with respect to some of the economic issues that the president's trying to address. I do think, however, some of the manner in which that has been undertaken has created some anxiety in key allies. And so if we ended up in a place, for instance, where China's tariffs were much lower than other countries, I think that would probably raise some questions. The hardest thing is that this is an alliance that requires strong public support. And we have been lucky, Randy and I in recent years have seen support in the United States for Japan and Japanese support for the United States at an all-time high. I think there are some signs of erosion of support right now, and my hope is that that will be reaffirmed by a strong partnership between Prime Minister Takaichi and President Trump after a period of as Randy described, norm breaking, which can be jarring to key allies. So I think understanding the importance of the public support. I worked in this alliance after the Cold War, as did Randy, in which there were many concerns. So I'm much more confident today than I was in years past. The second issue, and I'll just go quickly, what we've heard from the Admiral and others is undeniable. The nuclear issues are real in Asia. And what we see are developments in a couple of different places. One, the saber rattling that Russia has undertaken against Ukraine. Again, a complete violation of the NPT and deeply concerning. North Korea's big nuclear developments, continuing their nuclear build, and the largest nuclear upgrade in modern history, which is underway in China. What does that mean? It means that the United States has to be deeply attentive to our extended deterrence and what that, how to support that, how to strengthen that. Randy worked on that. I did primarily in the Indo-Pacific with South Korea. I think being inventive and clear about the need to integrate nuclear issues into the U.S.-Japan relationship and not simply say, oh, no, this is not a real thing. It is a real thing. The nuclear threats are powerful, they're real, and the United States has to be attentive to them. If one country in Asia went nuclear, there would be one new country went nuclear, there would be a rapid succession of other countries. I think that would likely be destabilizing. And so I think the nuclear issue that has been described is, in fact, needing to be of clear focus. The last thing would be, I'm very hopeful that the president will be firm and clear in his engagements with President Xi, unmistakable about U.S. strategic interests. Randy and I were in a discussion a little bit before this. The hope will be that he will reaffirm our strong commitment to the maintenance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. If he contemplated even subtle changes in how the United States regards Taiwan. And if he did that when he was in Beijing, I think it would likely have major consequences in the Indo-Pacific. And so the hope is he will take the counsel of most bipartisan folks in the United States and key allies and partners to be careful about the nature of the stability of American commitments to the maintenance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait.
Thank you. Well, we're coming to the end of our time for the panel. Unfortunately, this is a discussion that could go on for some time. We have such depth of expertise. But on the question of sunrise or sunset, I think we've heard a number of challenges outlined, many of which have to do with details that we just don't yet know and ambiguities that are out there, and questions of where new administration in the U.S. will prioritize and how their many policies in other areas will affect security in complex ways. But I think we've also heard the panelists emphasize a lot the important steps that have been taken over many years in the U.S.-Japan alliance, the very deep bipartisan consensus there is, and really the importance of realizing a much fuller U.S.-Japan partnership. So with that, I'd like to conclude. Please thank our panelists, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you. I would like to thank the facilitator, Ms. Govella, and all the distinguished panelists. Please join me in giving them a big round of applause, and thank you very much. With this, we would like to bring to a close the 22nd CSIS Nikkei Symposium, A Changing World and New Choices for Japan. The symposium today will be reported by Nikkei electronic version, and the article will be carried by the morning edition of Nikkei tomorrow, and archive live streaming will be available today, and we will let you know by email. Once again, thank you very much for your participation, both real and online. Thank you.
ご参加の皆様にお願い申し上げます。お手数ですが、同時通訳レシーバーは受付にご返却ください。また、お忘れ物がございませんよう、どうぞ気をつけてお帰りください。本日はご参加いただき、誠にありがとうございました。